Have you ever wondered about the epic face-off between David and Goliath? How could a 5-foot-tall teenager bring down a 9-foot military veteran? It's a story that has captivated imaginations for centuries, but have you ever thought that maybe there could be more to the story than meets the eye or ear? In this video, we will relive the story of David and Goliath and unravel the deep meanings within it. The battle between David and Goliath happened on a hilltop in Judah. This hilltop overlooked the Elah Valley. Goliath, a 9-foot-tall military veteran, stood against the entire camp of Israel's army, and not one of Israel's soldiers could challenge him. For 40 days, Goliath taunted Israel, making fun of them every day. The Bible says in 1 Samuel 17:8-11, Goliath went out and shouted to the army of Israel, "Why are you lining up for battle? I'm the best soldier in our army, and all of you are in Saul's army. Choose your best soldier to come out and fight me. If he can kill me, our people will be your slaves. But if I kill him, your people will be our slaves. Here and now I challenge Israel's whole army. Choose someone to fight me." Saul and his men heard what Goliath said, but they were so frightened of Goliath that they couldn't do a thing. Goliath came out and gave his challenge every morning and every evening for 40 days. David, a young shepherd boy, comes into the scene and throws the challenge back in Goliath's face with a statement so bold everyone came to a standstill. David said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And then the battle begins. Before we discuss the battle and the significance of what happened, we need to understand who the two parties in this battle really are and where they came from. Who was David? And what was he like? David was the youngest son of Jesse, a father of 9 sons in the tribe of Judah. David's father was a farmer and sheep breeder in Bethlehem. As a young shepherd in his early teens, David had a rugged outdoorsman's appearance, tanned skin, strong build, and weathered hands. Yet within this hardy exterior lay a musical gift and an abiding faith that would ultimately prepare him for the great responsibilities that lay ahead. The Bible describes him as ruddy in complexion, handsome, and of good appearance, even in his youth. Picture a young Middle Eastern boy in his shepherd clothing, a tunic, cloak, and sandals. David spent most of his time in the rolling hills, tending to his family's flock of sheep. He was the youngest of the children, so it became David's duty by default to take on the domestic chores of the house, like tending to the sheep. You may think David's assignment was safe enough for anyone to be able to execute. However, David did not find it so. Through his duties, he learnt skills that saved his life, made him into a stellar warrior, and engraved on his heart principles that would catapult him from the field to the palace. As we will soon see, David's days were usually filled with the routine tasks of a shepherd, guiding the sheep to pasture and ensuring they had enough water. But one day, this routine changed. The Bible tells us that the flock was attacked while David tended to them. They were attacked not just once, but twice. On the first occasion, it was a lion, and next came a bear. You can imagine how much danger he must have been in at these times. David himself tells us of 2 of these instances in 1 Samuel 17:34-36, when he was speaking to Saul, "I work as a shepherd for my father. Whenever a lion or a bear has come and attacked one of my lambs, I have gone after it and struck it down to rescue the lamb from the predator's mouth. If it turned to attack me, I would take it by the chin, beat it, and kill it. I have killed both a lion and a bear, and as your servant I will kill this uncircumcised Philistine too, since he has dared to taunt the armies of the living God." David's bravery, musical dexterity, and sense of responsibility were not his only exemplary qualities. He also had a deep fellowship with God. We know this because one day the prophet Samuel arrived in Bethlehem with a mission from God to anoint the next king of Israel. Samuel was guided to Jesse's house, where he asked to see Jesse's sons. One by one, Jesse presented his sons, but none of them were chosen by God. Finally, Samuel asked if there were any more sons. Jesse hesitated, but then mentioned his youngest, David, who was out in the fields. When David was brought before Samuel, God confirmed that this young shepherd boy was his chosen one. Samuel anointed David with oil, signifying that he would one day be king. It was a moment of divine promise, but also one that must have felt surreal and overwhelming for David, who went back to his sheep, perhaps pondering the incredible future that lay ahead. It was proof of the existing love and fellowship that he had with God. The story continues as Goliath continues to threaten Israel. On this fateful day, Jesse also sends David to his elder brothers. Jesse said to David, "Take this bushel of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers. Give this cheese to their captain and see how the boys are getting along, and bring us back a letter from them." We know from a few verses before here that the 3 oldest sons of Jesse, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had already volunteered for Saul's army to fight the Philistines, so their father sending David to bring them food and to check on them was a show of deep concern. The kind a father would have for his children. Saul and the Israeli army were camped at the valley of Elah, and that's where David headed for. He left the sheep with another shepherd and took off early the next morning with the gifts. This little observation shows the shepherd's heart of David. If he left the sheep to run an errand for his father, he made sure the sheep were still well cared for. He arrived at the outskirts of the camp, just as the Israeli army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israeli and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left his luggage with a baggage officer and hurried out to the ranks to find his brothers so he could complete his father's task. As he was talking with them, he saw Goliath the giant step out from the Philistine troops and shout his challenge to the army of Israel. As soon as they saw him, the Israeli army began to run away in fright. Why were the Israelites frightened? What could have caused an entire army of warriors, of not just any nation, but of Israel, to quake in their boots? Remember that Israel before now had faced several enemies way out of their weight class and had been victorious countless times by God's help. What was it about Goliath that made them this scared? The answer to that question is an understanding of who Goliath was. So far we know who David was, but we are yet to explore this giant Goliath. Goliath was a well-decorated member of the Philistine army. He was their champion warrior, and we can imagine that he had never lost a battle. We will use 3 qualities he displayed, especially in this battle against Israel, to describe who he really was. 1. His Titan appearance. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall, a living tower of muscle and might. His presence was a spectacle of raw power and indomitable force. His armor, a bronze coat of scale mail that glinted in the sunlight, each scale meticulously crafted to offer maximum protection. It weighed 5,000 shekels, a burden no ordinary man could bear, but to Goliath it was as light as a feather. A bronze helmet crowned his head, and bronze greaves protected his legs, shimmering like molten metal. Across his back was slung a massive javelin, its iron point alone weighing 600 shekels. His spear was very thick and undoubtedly very heavy too. To Goliath's voice of thunder, Goliath's voice was like thunder rolling across the valley. Each word he spoke reverberated through the hearts of the Israelites, a chilling reminder of the doom he promised. Twice a day, for 40 days, he strode into the valley, issuing his challenge. His words dripped with scorn and arrogance, taunting the Israelites and defying their God. "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." The Israelites quaked at his challenge. None dared step forward to face this colossus, for he seemed invincible, a force of nature cloaked in bronze and fury. 3. He had an aura of invincibility. Goliath's confidence was as formidable as his physical prowess. He moved with the certainty of one who had never known defeat, his every gesture a declaration of supremacy. His eyes, cold and calculating, surveyed the battlefield with the disdain of a predator assured of its dominance. To the Philistines, he was an unshakable pillar of strength, to the Israelites, an insurmountable obstacle. In the presence of Goliath, hope withered and courage gave way. He was the embodiment of fear, a living nightmare clad in armor. But even giants have their fates, and in the shadow of his towering form, destiny waits, biding its time for a shepherd boy with a sling and a stone. Thus stood Goliath, the living embodiment of terror and might, the seemingly invincible champion. There's something significant here for you and I to take note of. The truth is, we all have a Goliath. Although none of us may have had to physically combat medieval beings clad in armor, we sure have faced struggles that were equally gigantic, both emotionally and mentally. Whether it be your goals for the year, dreams for the future, or a challenge you're trying to overcome, there's comfort for you as we continue this story. On the field of battle, there was vivid fear on every man's face. "Have you seen the giant?" the soldiers asked one another. "He has insulted the entire army of Israel." King Saul couldn't take the insult, so he did something about it, and what he did also got the soldiers talking. They spoke to one another saying, "Have you heard about the huge reward the king has offered to anyone who kills him? The king will give him one of his daughters for a wife, and his whole family will be exempted from paying taxes." What a reward! Although the men were too afraid to challenge Goliath, they all wanted to bag this prize. David overheard the conversations and talked to some others standing there to verify the report. What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his insults to Israel? He also asked them, who is this heathen Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? And he received the same reply as before. David was so puzzled at what was going on. With the heavy bounty and the stinging insult, all at once he had to ask questions. But when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking like that, he was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. "What about the sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know what arrogant spoiled you are. You just want to see the battle." Some people wonder why David's brother reacted this harshly towards David. A few guesses have been made, but one that stands out is this: his elder brother was jealous of him. Remember that shortly before this, David has been anointed as king of Israel, God's preferred choice over his brothers. So it is quite safe to assume that they didn't welcome him with open arms. This is particularly striking because someone else in the Bible has a similar experience of his own brothers getting turned against him. Can you take a guess in the comments? It was Joseph. Joseph's brothers hated him because of the dream he had and shared. It was a dream that typified what happened to David when he was chosen as king. In Joseph's dream, his parents and brothers symbolically bowed down to him in obeisance and worshipped. These two instances of David and Joseph further allude to someone even greater. They are both shadowing Jesus Christ through these occurrences, because when Jesus also came, he said to his fellow Jews, his brothers, that he had come to save them. Even though he was God and had all the authority and power, he came to save them. Yet just like Joseph and David, his own rejected him. Let's get back to the story. David replied to his brother and said, "What have I done now? I was only asking a question." He left and walked over to some others and asked them the same thing to be that much sure. He received the same answer. David had an idea brewing in his mind. He was going to take the challenge. He had gone round asking questions and realized that no one else was willing to stand up to Goliath. Everyone was too scared of him, even though there was a very attractive reward for whoever successfully dared to go against Goliath. David decided he will. When it was finally realized what David meant, someone told King Saul what had been going on, and the king sent for him. David came into the king's tent and said to King Saul, "Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of this Philistine." For a moment, imagine yourself to be King Saul. Now comment what your reaction would be to be this young shepherd boy. "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "How can a kid like you fight with a man like him? You are only a boy, and he has been in the army since he was a boy." But David persisted. "When I am taking care of my father's sheep," he said, "and a lion or a bear comes and grabs a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and take the lamb from its mouth. If it turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this heathen Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who saved me from the claws and teeth of the lion and the bear will save me from this Philistine." We have quite a lot to uncover here. Let's explore the deeper meanings in 5 statements made here. 1. You are not able, for you are a youth. Saul thought David was disqualified because of his age, size, and inexperience. This shows that Saul looked at the battle purely in natural, outward terms. The outward tale of the tape said there was no way David could win. The tale of God's tape said there was no way David could lose. 2. You are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. Saul essentially told David, "He's been a soldier longer than you have been alive. How can you ever defeat him?" Again, this shows that Saul only looked at the outward, not the spiritual dimensions of this battle. 3. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. God prepared David for this exact battle when David was a lowly shepherd. A lion attacked the lambs, and David fought the lion. A bear came against the sheep, and David battled with the bear. All along, God prepared David to fight Goliath. How long did David prepare to fight Goliath? All his life, up to that day. This is generally God's pattern for preparation. He calls us to be faithful right where we are, and then uses our faithfulness to accomplish greater things. If David ran scared at the lion or the bear, he would never have been ready to fight Goliath now. But he was faithful then, so he will be faithful now. 4. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. David increases in boldness as the story progresses. First, he said someone should fight Goliath for a righteous cause. Then he said he would fight Goliath. Now he says he will kill Goliath. 5. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. As a shepherd facing lions and bears, David had no idea he was being trained to fight a giant. In the midst of our preparation, we rarely see how God will use it. Yet now, David can look back and know that the same God who delivered him before will also deliver him now. David knew that God's help in times past is a prophecy of his help in the future. Saul finally consented to David's proposal. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can hardly move," he exclaimed, and took them off again. Then he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag, and armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, started across to Goliath. It is very interesting that David chose stones and a sling over a sword and armor. Saul was still in the natural, in the flesh. He figured that if this boy were going to beat Goliath, he needed the best armor in all Israel, the armor of the king. Saul tried to put his armor on David, but it didn't work. It didn't work because Saul's armor did not physically fit David. Everything was too big, and David could not move well with Saul's armor. It also didn't work because Saul's armor did not spiritually fit David's armor. Military technology or human wisdom would not win this battle. The Lord God of Israel would win this battle. Often people try to fight with another person's armor. They see God do something wonderful through someone else, and they try to copy it without really making it their own. God's work is never most effectively done in this way. Sadly, many people would say the same about the armor of God. I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. Are you more familiar with the weapons and armor of the flesh or the weapons and armor of the Spirit? David had to renounce Saul's armor. He had to vow, I will not fight with man's armor. I will trust in the Lord and his armor instead. Often, we want a safe middle ground where we try to wear both kinds of armor. God wants us to trust in him and him alone. David used the same tools he used before as a shepherd to kill the lion and the bear. Why did David choose 5 stones? He only needed 1 to kill Goliath. Some suggest, although humorously, that it was because Goliath had 4 relatives who were also giants, whom David and his associates later killed. David then drew near to Goliath. This is where it mattered. David could have said the bold words, renounced Saul's armor, trusted in God's armor, and gathered his shepherd's tools. But if he never went into the battle, what would it matter? Ultimately, David had the faith not just to talk, not just to renounce, not just to prepare, but also to actually draw near to the Philistine. That's real faith. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield-bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this nice little red-cheeked boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals," Goliath yelled. Obviously, because of Goliath's size and experience, it was not a fair fight. Added to that, it was 2 against 1, because Goliath had an armor-bearer with him. The idea behind Goliath looking about for David is that David was so small compared to this man that Goliath had a hard time even seeing him. But when he did see him, he disdained him. There was nothing in David that struck fear or respect in Goliath's heart. Goliath felt insulted that they sent David as their choice soldier. David shouted in reply, "You come to me with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of the armies of heaven and of Israel, the very God whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head, and then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And Israel will learn that the Lord does not depend on weapons to fulfill his plans. He works without regard to human means. He will give you to us." We can imagine Goliath's deep, deep bass voice reverberating against the tall hills surrounding the valley of Elah. The sound struck fear into the heart of every Israelite soldier, and probably even some of the Philistine soldiers. Then David answered with his teenage voice, perhaps even with his voice cracking. The Philistines laughed when they heard David practically screaming in his cracking voice, and the Israelites were both horrified and embarrassed. But we most appreciate David's reply. To say, "I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts," is to say, I come as a representative of the Lord of hosts, the God who has heavenly armies at his command. I am a sent man, a man on a mission from God. David was careful to say, "The Lord will deliver you into my hand." David was bold, but bold in God, not in himself. He knew the battle belonged to the Lord. This whole incident made David famous, but that was not why he did it. He did it for the fame and the glory of the Lord, not his own name. He wanted all the earth to know that there is a God in Israel. As Goliath approached, David ran out to meet him, and reaching into his shepherd's bag, took out a stone, hurled it from his sling, and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and the man fell on his face to the ground. So David conquered the Philistine giant with a sling and a stone. Since he had no sword, he ran over and pulled Goliath's from its sheath and killed him with it, and then cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the Israelis gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. Then the Israeli army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. Later David took Goliath's head to Jerusalem, but stored his armor in his tent as a trophy. What a scene! There's even more to note here. Goliath, enraged at David's boldness, drew near to quickly kill David. David didn't run away. He didn't hide. He didn't panic. He didn't drop to his knees and pray. Instead, David hurried and ran to meet the Philistine. Many Christians struggle at this very point. Is God supposed to do it, or am I supposed to do it? The answer is yes, God does it and we do it. Trust God, rely on Him, and then get to work and work as hard as you can, run right at the enemy. That is how the work of God is done. He slung the stone and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face. David had the calm hand and careful aim of someone who really trusted God. We must also note how this battle was won out with the sheep. In those lonely hours alone with the lambs, David talked to God and took a lot of target practice with his sling. Now his communion with the Lord and his skill with the sling are both used by God. Everyone else thought, Goliath is so big I can't beat him. David thought, Goliath is so big I can't miss him. A man of less faith might have been too nervous to take the proper aim, just as the Philistine god Dagon fell on his face before the Lord, so now the worshipper of Dagon falls on his face. This is the story of David and Goliath with as many lessons as could fit into this video. Which one stands out most to you? What do you find striking about this story? If you found value in this video, please like and share what you think in the comments. There's more amazing content coming, so click subscribe to make sure you don't miss out. Meanwhile, you can click on any of the videos on the screen to learn more about Scripture. Thanks for watching, and may the Lord bless and guide your day.